So, I told myself I was going to do my best this summer season to watch a few shows and actually come up with some half-decent opinions, and then I saw that Isekai Mao was on the docket and proceeded to lose all hope in this medium. But what I did notice while I was waiting through my usual misery is that Overlord made it to Season 3 this year. Now, Overlord's a show I initially had some interest in, but kinda just forgot to watch. So, in an attempt to remedy this growing mountainous pile of planned watches, I sat down after work one day and rewatched the first episode or two, actually, really. And honestly, I was less than impressed. Now, mind you, I'm exhausted from this furious stream of isekais that's broken through this proverbial dam, simply because it waterlogs actually interesting stories under a mire of, stat screens and thick elves. But the largely generic setting of Overlord isn't what I took the most issue with. The first episode is a slog, and one that I quickly came to remember after getting through the first minute of just pure exposition. And for most people, this would be a deal breaker, but for an exhausted me just looking to veg out on my ratty couch, this is apparently all my liquored mind wanted. Might need better standards. So, going in, you'll be introduced to a colorful, if not Montague cast of monsters and demis that fall subserviently to the titular Overlord, who, being the MC, is a 20-something-year-old devout whose last day somehow whisked him away to another world while imbuing him with endgame stats and baubles that allow him to be an absolute menace to the comparatively agrarian masses. I should not have written that much. It's this new world beginning I actually like. It imbues him with the status of merciful god in the eyes of his servants, and he maintains this absolute power that instills their continued servitude. The majority of the setup is unique. It gives a nice fresh introduction to the story elapsing, even if I could do without this game lingo. That said, it does provide an interesting take on the, very worn road of isekai narratives. There is also this internal monologue that helps build this dynamic between the MC's true self and this persona that's half almost corrupting him as he steps forward. It's honestly very similar to Log Horizon in premise, almost extremely so, whose novella definitely predates Maruyama, and the inspiration shows. The problem comes from how the world presents itself, stemming almost entirely from this incredibly plain MC. Now, I enjoy the idea of a villainous premise, it's something the genre really needs, but Ein seems to lack any semblance of character. I like to describe his personality creatively, but it largely boils down to the levels of motivationless drivel you'd expect from an actual game final boss. All his interactions seem to lack any input other than yes, no, or just a bit differently, leaving at least me near the end a bit frustrated because I felt nothing towards him or any other character even when the show's trying to elicit a fragment of this near its conclusion. And when it comes to animation and sound design, I almost feel scammed as there's nothing more than a camera pan or a simple background beat to fill this void. Except for, I suppose, the two actual fights in the show where, I'm guessing the middling budget must have largely gone. I mean, I'd say it probably goes from roughly a 3 to a 6, but it still feels overall a bit cheap, and ultimately that's the crux of this entire show. Nothing really feels genuine or thought-provoking. I mean, sure, there's actual violence and some blood, but it's largely more of a set piece and not an actually meaningful component. As the show, despite being 18+, doesn't really make good use of this freedom and attempts, what I can only assume, to rein in more fans, despite its major selling point being this expected grit, leaving it in this very strange kind of limbo. Going in, I was dreading the second season. My impressions weren't terrible, but they were far from what I consider, acceptable. Especially after I saw that the general consensus was that the show took a slight dip in quality. But I should have known better than to trust the Mao sources. Immediately, the show, almost knowing that its failings center around Ainz, steers away from him for 3 straight episodes, and devotes much of its time to creating some actually meaningful characters, even if they're lizards. Now, it's a pretty risky turn, but I feel it actually gave a good distance away from, the problems, to give the show some actual appeal, that being the oppressive nature of this Overlord, which till this point had been more bumbling and less fear-instilling. Now the first arc is overall pretty good, even though I still think it isn't really using its R rating properly, but at least comparatively it's leagues ahead from anything from the first 12. Characters who are more than a fill-in-the-blank for diversity and textbook personality take the stage, and you can actually sympathize with them, to a degree, for their plights, even if I think it's a bit convenient at times, not very perfect. Not very perfect? That sentence was far from it. This story bounces between perspectives, something that was severely lacking in the first 12, and it allows for a better insight into the world and its inhabitants, while steering away from the initial sin of tell and don't show. Now, this is certainly good, this is admirable, and from the author's perspective you can tell they're actually growing in their presentation and making, developing a better story. Unfortunately, the story still relies heavily on the game mechanics, which honestly just hold the story back, as I feel a lot of the information they convey just could have been largely omitted. While the animation crams in far too many scenes with poorly made CGI, which is just incredibly visually arresting. But with this extensive cast and clearly higher budget, we do get far better music, far better sound, and even better fight scenes. which, while better, still failed to deliver as the director, for some reason, cuts away from the important moments and just kind of filibusters towards the credits. All this accumulates into the least fulfilling final battle I've ever had the displeasure of watching, but at this point I'm far too, deep to stop. And, again, as if actually reviewing their failings from the first 2 seasons, the show makes another substantial step forward, towards acceptable. Even if some situations feel a bit too, convenient or contrived, we do see this, lingering influence of Heinz has over the world and how it's, budding into consequence. We also step back into some old and new characters which do a better job under the scope, and there's some, interesting and better interplay between the servants. The show overall is just moving forward, and I really like this. I mean, honestly, the most stagnant part of the series is the OP, which, all kind of follow the same drawn-out sequence, characters here, there, colors, it's not too interesting. But contrasting that almost is the EDs are absolutely brilliant. They certainly make up for this lack of appeal in the OP. So overall, Overlord is a very interesting show. Given the plot in the beginning, I'm surprised so many people stuck around for the end, but while it's far from a masterpiece, I do like how I get to see this growth in, the entire staff behind it, the direction, the narrative, the design. It shows a very clear learning curve, which I can appreciate, and I'm looking forward to hopefully, a good conclusion episode. That would be nice. I'm certainly glad I watched this far, even though I expected better from Madhouse's second lead director. That said, I am looking forward to what he does, in the future, because I feel like he has talent. He just needs to utilize it a little bit better. He just needs some more work, really. Oh well, I'm looking forward to it. As long as he can cut back on the CG. Thanks for sticking around for the video. I know it's been a while. I know it's going to be a while until the next one. Even though I have ideas, I'm very bad about, making these, which is why this one's coming out so late. Oops. That said, if you're looking forward to the next one, let me know below. And yeah, do the whatever usual YouTube things they tell you to do, because I'm too lazy to fucking whatever, man.